Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Business Inside Out podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Kimbley, and what I want to talk to you about today is something that I've been thinking a lot about in light of something that happened to me on Thursday, and that thing is unintended consequences. Now, you probably heard of consequences, and when you think about the idea of consequences, I just want to break down the word for a second. Is like if we think about the idea of the word consequence, so there's a sequence of things that happen, and con meaning with, right? So with a sequence of things that happen. So what I want to share with you today is that with a sequence of things that you choose to do in your daily life, in your business, in your marriage, in your physical body, in the way that you approach your spirituality, those things are actually going to influence your business more heavily than just the decisions that you make inside of your business. So the question then becomes like, all right, what does that even mean? So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. There are tons of unintended consequences to being in business and doing business in a certain way. And what I'm all about is creating a new era of business, like a new era of you being able to see people, of you being able to express more joy, of you being able to build a legacy for your family. But the trick with this is that there are unintended consequences when we do things or don't do things a certain way. So what do I mean by that? Let me share a story with you. We had a client or potential client who walked into our office on Thursday afternoon. Now, we don't take walk-ins because we have a very specific process, and neither here nor there. He comes in and the guy has a conversation, and I've literally watched this guy walk by my business like probably for the last 3 or 4 years, and never came in. Like, he has 3 kids, he walks by with his kids, they go to the jiu-jitsu place, so I've seen him and I've seen him regularly. So he finally walks into the office, and the first thing he says is like, long-time listener, first-time caller, kind of making a little joke about how he's been by so much, but never really decided to like invest in himself or invest in his family. And it comes up and he's like, I have this thing in my shoulder blade, and I was just wondering, like, I know you guys probably have a different process and it looks a little bit different, but I was just wondering, like, is there anything that you could do for me today? And obviously my answer is nope, that's not how we operate. And I walk him through this conversation of, here's exactly what we can and cannot do for you, and what you would have to do in order to even get under care with us, for even consider having a conversation with you about starting care with you, about changing your life, about getting you what you're actually looking for, because I know for a fact that it's more than just your shoulder pain. And so I tell this to this guy, literally like word for word, this is a conversation we're having. He's like, that's great, you're young, but give it until you're 50 years old and then decide, like change your mind. It's basically what he's telling me is like, he's like, dude, I'll pay you, whatever. And he's like, you can make some money now and just see me for a couple visits, but I can't commit to a plan because I travel all the time and I work 60 hours a week and I have 3 kids and I have a wife, and the excuses are going on and on and on and on and on. Now, here's the interesting part of this. When I think about unintended consequences, the reason this story brings me so much excitement, it brings me so much joy, I think it's so good, is because this idea that we have to like serve everybody who comes into our practice. Because here's what I know is that if I would have said, yeah, dude, we don't need to do an exam, let's just adjust you and then you can drop in whenever you want, the unintended consequence of that would be him taxing my mental state every time he comes into the practice. What do I mean by this? Literally, what this guy would have done, I know because I've seen it before when I used to practice this way back in the day when I first started practicing, is like, we would let people decide whether they committed to 1 or 2 visits or they committed to a whole care plan. And inevitably, I would get let down every single time. And not only that, the person would come in and they'd be like, my shoulder blades still bother me. My knees still bother me. My low back still bother me. My sciatica. My headaches. Whatever the thing is that they were looking for relief from in the first place. And so I always tell people, like, listen, if you are just here to get out of pain, like, we won't work with you because I'm competing with a bottle of Advil or a bottle of Tylenol, or you can go to your medical doctor and get a prescription to some other narcotic that's going to take your pain away. It's going to come back again tomorrow, but you can just take it. It's going to be way easier. You don't have to show up here twice a week. And like the guy literally says to me, he's like, well, that's not what I'm looking for. And I'm like, exactly, because it's more than about your pain. So here's the thing, unintended consequences. The unintended consequence back when I was first practicing, if I would have let this guy come into my business, would have been that I would have been frustrated. I would have been mentally taxed. I would have been exhausted by not framing him in the conversation that we have. So there's a specific conversation around framing. I'm not going to get into that on this episode, but what I do want to share with you is this idea that there are unintended consequences to you wanting to help everybody with the spine. And one of those consequences is literally getting exhausted and getting frustrated because people don't commit to you long enough to actually see a massive change inside of their life. And anybody who would sit here and listen to the podcast would be like, oh yeah, that's convenient for you to say, but you just want to sell more visits and you just want to sell another package. Like, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. Nowhere else in anyone's life, nowhere else can you go one time and it like be fixed forever. You don't go to the gym one time and get a six pack. You don't go to the gym one time and get big biceps. You don't eat healthy for one day and expect to get results. You don't go to the medical doctor and take a pill one time and everything just magically resolved. They want you to be on pills for the rest of your life. So it's no different with chiropractic care. It's like, but we're addressing the brain. We're addressing the most important part of the body. And I know this isn't a chiropractic conversation necessarily, but in the context of your business, I'm going to have you consider that there are unintended consequences to just addressing someone's symptoms that they show up with. There are unintended consequences to allowing people to start with you or one or two visits and then disappear from you, and then you be frustrated every single time they come back into your practice because you know they could get a deeper level of results that they're not getting. How do they get those deeper level of results? One is commitment, obviously. And so when someone commits to you, there's an unintended consequence. When you show up for someone and you say, this is what we stand for, this is how we operate as a business. I am not going to see you for one or two visits. I'm going to put you on a plan based on what I find in your exam. Some people are going to opt themselves out. The guy that I'm talking about, he opted himself out. He's like, are you sure there's nothing you can do? I'm like, dude, nope. And he tried to convince me. He's like, I'm not trying to tell you how to practice. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. But he's like, I really just need some help. And I'm like, that's great, man. Like, I know we can 100% help you, but you have to commit to our process, because I'll be frustrated, you'll be frustrated, because I understand that there are unintended consequences to wanting to help him. And do I want to help him? 100% for sure. That's not the point, right? The point is, though, is that how do I show up for everyone else? There's an unintended consequence to only having people inside of your business who you love serving, like on the deepest level possible. And that unintended consequence is a positive consequence. It's a sequence. A sequence of things happen when people show up who I love serving, who I get to have uplifting conversations with. Guess what? Those uplifting conversations fuel me more to serve the next person. And then by the end of the day, instead of being exhausted at the end of the day, I'm more on fire than when I started in the morning. And people notice this all the time. They're like, dang, dude, why are you so juiced up in the afternoon? I'm so juiced up in the afternoon because I've had all day of people who I love serving who are getting amazing results because they committed to something. And the unintended consequence is I get to show up for those people at a higher level. And then not only do I get to show up for those people in our side of our office at a higher level, but I get to come home at the end of the day. And I get to play with my daughter, and I get to be stoked on playing with her. And then I get to eat dinner with my family. And then I get to hang out with my wife after my daughter goes to bed, and I'm stoked on all of it, and I love to talk about it, and it's just a joy. Like, it's a joy to practice this way. These are all unintended consequences of you as a business owner, as a doctor, sticking to your guns. Now, if you like seeing people for one and done visits, great. I have nothing against that. This is for you to decide, but I'm telling you, there are unintended consequences to that thought process. And we talked about the mathematics of seeing people for more visits and lifetime value on other episodes of the podcast. If you haven't caught that, I would encourage you to go back and listen to it. Now, there are other unintended consequences outside of this conversation of framing and outside of your mental energy, right? There's literally an unintended consequence financially. And that financial consequence ends up being like, you're taking time away from somebody who's a one and done person that you could be pouring into somebody who is a lifetime person or patient or client or whatever you call them inside of your practice. So not only is there a financial piece to it, there's very much a mental piece which should directly pour over into your relationships at home and in your business. And this is the idea, is that when we start to think about, where do I stand today? What are my core values? We've talked about core values on this podcast before. What are my core values? What do I stand for? What do I believe in? How do I use chiropractic care for myself? And how can I hold every single other person accountable at that same level? Because here's what I know, is that if you let people slide, then somewhere in your life you're letting yourself slide. If you let people slide on not being able to commit to a plan, I guarantee there are places where you're not committing inside of your life and your results are suffering. And those results suffering is an unintended consequence that you may not even be consciously aware of because of a specific set of things and rules that you live by. And the idea is awareness, right? The idea is waking up our brain. The idea is waking up the brains of our clients and patients, and so that we can get them to stick with us for longer, so we can start to change the game. And so this is why this guy who walks into my practice, I could have easily made a couple $100 with him and done an exam and just adjusted him that day, but we operate from a different set of principles. And my principles, one of them is operating out of this idea of excellence, of literally being the best, obsessing over every single detail of every single thing that we do and making sure that it's perfect. And here's what I know, is that his results would not have been perfect by letting him just come in whenever he wanted because he was quote unquote too busy. So what did I tell this guy? Well, I told him that there are other chiropractors in the area. There are people that I would refer him to that I would trust for somebody who's looking for something like what he's looking for. And I also told him that the results are probably not going to be what they could be. Basically, I'm telling him that like we're not a good fit. Without saying those words, I'm telling him we're not a good fit. And he was frustrated by the conversation, but he also appreciated it because I'm not in the business of taking someone's money. I'm in the business of getting people a specific result. And that specific result is outside of a pain conversation. What's so cool about this is one of my favorite things that I told him, and it kind of opened his eyes, and this is where our conversation stopped. And I was like, dude, because you're telling me you're too busy is the exact reason that you need this more than people who aren't too busy. It's because when we awaken your brain, what we know is you will gain more presence, more productivity, and more profit. And it doesn't matter whether you own your own business or not. I guarantee you'll be more present, you'll get more done in the same amount of time, and you'll have more time to spend with your kids. The whole reason he was showing up in the first place, it wasn't about his shoulder. He was looking for someone to support him. However, I told him straight up, it's like, if you're not willing to commit, we can't support you because we know you won't get the result that you're looking for. We'll be frustrated. You'll be frustrated. Unintended consequence. Guess what the unintended consequence of turning him away was? Is that I got to carry my excitement and fuel and energy through the rest of the day. My team saw it. The girls were fired up for the rest of the day. And it's because we have created an environment inside of our office where people are self-selective. They either select in or they select out. And it all has to do with thinking about the unintended consequences of every single thing that you do. There are a number of places you can do this. You can think about care plans. You can think about the way that you charge in your fee schedules. Like some people have these confusing fee schedules where it's like, well, you can just pick whatever fee you want to pick. Like, what's the unintended consequence of that? What's it say about your care or your belief about your care and what you provide for people if they get to pick the cheapest of the cheap or the most expensive? Like, it says something specific about you. So my friends, I would have you consider this is like, where in your business and in your life are you seeing unintended consequences, either good or bad? And if you're seeing negative consequences from something that you're doing, maybe monthly payments are low, maybe you're not getting enough people to prepay, maybe you can't get people to stick with you for more than 1 or 2 visits. Like, these are all unintended consequences of things that you're doing, things that you're saying, the way that you're communicating inside of your practice. And this is what I help chiropractors with specifically. This is what I am the best at. So my friends, where in your life are you experiencing unintended consequence? And then what's one thing you can do today to start to break those? I will come at you again next week. I hope you got some value out of this episode. If you're interested in learning more, you can always check out other episodes of the podcast, or you can check out our Instagram at Dr. Daniel Kimbley and at Nexus Family Chiropractic. Love you. I appreciate you. We'll come at you again next week. Peace.